We don't let in people who look like they slept in their car. This is an exclusive event, not a charity walk." That's what the bouncer said, loud enough for the people behind him to hear, loud enough to make a point, loud enough to feel powerful. The old man standing at the entrance didn't flinch, didn't raise a hand, didn't open his mouth to argue. He simply looked at the bouncer the way a mountain looks at wind, unmoved, patient, and entirely unbothered by something that small. He turned, walked back toward the parking lot, and sat down on a concrete divider near the far end of the lot where the lights didn't quite reach. Nobody followed him. Nobody checked on him. But 11 minutes later, the ground began to shake. If you believe the quietest men sometimes carry the loudest stories, type honor in the comments below. Eugene Calloway was not a man who took up space. At 76, he had the kind of face that people looked past in grocery stores and forgot in waiting rooms. Deep-set eyes the color of winter sky, hands that were large and rough and permanently stained at the knuckles from decades of engine grease that no soap had ever fully reached. He walked with a slight lean to the left, an old habit from a hip that had never healed quite right after 1987. He drove a 2003 Ford pickup that he'd bought second-hand and maintained himself. He wore on that particular evening a collared shirt the color of sage, pressed but not new, tucked into dark trousers with a crease that his late wife Margaret had always insisted upon. On his wrist, a watch that hadn't been fashionable since the Carter administration. On his chest, nothing. No pins, no badges, no indication of anything, except a man who had dressed carefully for an occasion that mattered to him. He had driven 4 hours and 16 minutes from Harlan County to attend the annual Aerospace Leadership Gala at the Meridian Event Center in downtown Louisville. The gala was held every year to honor individuals who had made extraordinary contributions to American aviation. This year, for the first time in the event's 23-year history, the keynote speaker was a sitting active-duty military officer. That officer was Colonel Daniel Calloway, Eugene's son. Eugene had received his invitation 6 weeks earlier, a thick cream envelope with gold-embossed lettering that had arrived in his mailbox between a water bill and a seed catalog. He'd held it for a long time before opening it, read it twice, slowly, then set it on the kitchen table and gone outside to sit on the porch and look at the sky the way he always did when something moved him too deeply for words. He hadn't told anyone he was coming, hadn't called Daniel to confirm, hadn't posted anything or mentioned it to his neighbor Frank or his Thursday morning coffee group at Millard's Diner. He simply marked the date on the kitchen calendar with a small circle, the same way he'd marked every one of Daniel's milestones since the boy was 7 years old, and started saving the gas money. The drive down had been quiet and good. He'd stopped once for coffee and a sandwich at a rest area outside Elizabethtown, eaten alone at a picnic table, watched a red-tailed hawk circle overhead for 11 minutes without moving a wing, and felt something close to peace. He arrived at the Meridian Event Center at 6:42 p.m., 18 minutes before the doors were scheduled to open. The Meridian was the kind of building that announced itself from 3 blocks away, glass and steel and lighting designed to make you feel small before you'd even reach the entrance. A deep red carpet ran from the main doors to the curb. Valets in black moved between luxury vehicles. Women in evening gowns and men in dress uniforms and tailored suits moved through the entrance in a steady, elegant stream. Eugene parked in the public lot 2 blocks east and walked. He wasn't nervous. He had attended events more intimidating than this, though none of them had been the kind he could talk about. He straightened his collar once, tucked the invitation envelope more securely inside his jacket, and joined the line moving toward the entrance. The line moved smoothly until it reached him. The bouncer, broad-shouldered, mid-30s, with the particular confidence of a man who had decided his job made him important, barely looked up when Eugene reached the rope. "Invitation." Eugene produced the envelope. The bouncer took it, turned it over and frowned. "This is a +1 for a Colonel Calloway. Are you Colonel Calloway?" "No, I'm his father, Eugene Calloway. The invitation was sent to me." The bouncer handed the envelope back. "Sir, this event is for honorees, confirmed guests, and registered media. We have a strict capacity limit and a dress code." I'm going to need you to step aside. Eugene looked at him evenly. I just told you. The invitation was sent to me directly. My name is on the envelope. Eugene Calloway, Harlan County. And I'm telling you the list I have doesn't show your name as a confirmed attendee. That envelope could belong to anyone. The bouncer lowered his voice, but not out of kindness, out of the particular cruelty of wanting the person to hear what came next without making a scene. Look, sir, I don't know who told you this was appropriate attire for a black tie gala, but this event isn't really designed for walk-ins. You understand what I mean? The woman behind Eugene made a small, uncomfortable sound. Eugene understood exactly what he meant. He had understood men like this his entire life, men who measured worth by what you wore and how you arrived and whether your shoes were new. He had dealt with them in rural Kentucky schoolyards, in military recruitment offices, in the early years of his service when his accent made certain officers dismiss him before he'd finished a sentence. He had outlasted every single one of them. But tonight was not the place. I understand, Eugene said. He took his envelope back, folded it once, and placed it in his shirt pocket. Then he turned and walked back toward the parking lot without another word. He found the concrete divider near the far edge of the lot, a low barrier separating the lot from a narrow service road, and sat down on it with the careful deliberateness of a man whose hip reminded him of gravity on cold evenings. He wasn't angry. Anger had never served him well, and he'd given it up sometime around 1994, the way other men gave up cigarettes, slowly, with intention, and without looking back. He was, if anything, tired. Not from the drive, not from standing in line, tired in the way that accumulates quietly over decades of being underestimated, of being the man in the room whose presence people questioned before they'd heard a word he had to say. He looked up at the sky, a habit so old it had become involuntary. Louisville's light pollution softened the stars, but he could still find the ones he needed. He always could. A young woman in catering uniform emerged from the side entrance with a bag of trash, stopped when she saw him, and paused. Sir, are you all right? It's getting cold out here. I'm fine, Eugene said, just taking some air. She looked at him for a moment longer than a stranger usually would. Are you here for the gala? I was going to be. She frowned. Did something happen at the entrance? Eugene smiled, a small private expression. Nothing I haven't survived before. She disappeared back inside. Eugene thought nothing more of it. He checked his watch. 7:04 p.m. Daniel would be taking the stage around 7:30. He wouldn't make the keynote. But that was all right. He'd heard Daniel speak before, in this very city, 17 years ago, at a high school auditorium with 30 parents and a broken microphone. He knew what his son sounded like when he meant something. He didn't need a front row seat to be proud. He opened his jacket pocket and removed the only other item he'd brought besides the invitation. A photograph, old, printed on the kind of paper they don't make anymore, slightly warped at one corner from years of being handled. 2 people in it, a woman with dark hair and a wide, unguarded smile holding an infant, and behind her a young man, maybe 25, lean and squinting into the sun, one hand raised to shade his eyes, looking upward at something outside the frame, looking at a plane. Always a plane. Eugene turned the photograph over. On the back, in Margaret's handwriting, Danny's first air show. He didn't cry once. Eugene never looked down. He held it in both hands, said nothing to no one, and that was how the catering worker found him when she came back out, not with trash this time, but with her phone already pressed to her ear. Inside the Meridian Event Center, Colonel Daniel Calloway stood backstage in his dress uniform, ribbons and medals arranged with geometric precision across his chest, his posture the result of 22 years of practice, and reviewed the last page of his keynote address. He was not a man who experienced stage fright. He had landed aircraft on moving carrier decks in 30-knot crosswinds. He had made decisions at altitude and speed that left no margin for hesitation. A room of aerospace executives and military personnel held no particular terror. But tonight felt different. Tonight, his father was somewhere in that building. His aide, Captain Reyes, appeared at his elbow with the quiet urgency of someone delivering news they'd rather not deliver. "Sir, I just received a call from one of the catering staff. Your father is outside in the parking lot. He was turned away at the entrance." Daniel turned to look at Reyes with an expression that was completely still and entirely unreadable, the face of a man processing information at high speed behind a carefully maintained exterior. "How long?" "Approximately 12 minutes, sir." Daniel set his notes on the side table. "Get me a direct line to the tower." Reyes blinked once. "Sir, you can't mean—" "Captain." Daniel's voice was quiet and absolute. "Get me the line." What happened next would be discussed at the Meridian Event Center for years. The first indication was the sound, a low, building frequency that seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the floor and the walls and the stemware on the tables before anyone could identify its source. Conversations faltered, heads turned, then the windows lit up, navigation lights first, red and green strobes cutting through the dark sky to the south. Then the roar became something physical, something that pressed against the chest, and the light resolved itself into a shape that no one in that room expected to see at this altitude, at this speed, in this location. An F-35 Lightning II descended from the cloud layer with the controlled, absolute authority of an aircraft that answered to no speed limit and no zoning ordinance. It came in low, low enough to read the markings if you knew what to look for, slowed to a hover that seemed to defy everything reasonable about physics, and descended with deliberate, unhurried precision onto the Meridian's outer courtyard. The ground shook. The chandeliers swayed. 200 people were on their feet without remembering how they got there. Security staff moved toward the exits. The facility director was already on his radio. Guests pressed against the windows in a single wave, phones raised, recording with the frantic energy of people who knew they were witnessing something they would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe accurately. The engines wound down. The canopy lifted. Colonel Daniel Calloway descended from the cockpit in full flight suit, helmet under his arm, the medals from his dress uniform now covered but not erased, boots finding the courtyard pavement with a sound nobody heard over their own held breath. He didn't look at the windows. He didn't acknowledge the cameras or the crowd or the facility director, now jogging toward him across the courtyard with the expression of a man calculating liability in real time. He walked with purpose through the service gate, past the valets who stepped back without being asked, around the corner of the building and into the parking lot, to the concrete divider, where his father sat, still holding the photograph, still looking at the sky. Eugene heard the footsteps and looked down from the clouds. He took in his son, the flight suit, the helmet, the aircraft still cooling on the courtyard 50 yards behind him, with the unhurried assessment of a man who had learned long ago not to show everything he felt on the surface. "You didn't have to do that," Eugene said. Daniel stopped 2 feet in front of him, came to full attention, raised his hand in a salute, sharp, formal, and completely genuine. "Yes, sir," he said, "I did." Eugene looked at him for a long moment, then he stood, slowly, the hip making its usual argument, and returned the salute with the precision of a man who had learned it before his son was born. They dropped their hands at the same time. Daniel's jaw worked once. "How long were you out here?" "Not long. I had good company." Eugene held up the photograph. Daniel took it, looked at it for a moment. His mother's smile, his father's upturned face, the invisible plane above the frame. He had seen this photograph many times throughout his life. It had hung in the kitchen on Birch Creek Road. It had been tucked into his first deployment bag. His mother had sent him a copy the week before she passed with a note that said only, "He never looked down. Neither should you." "She would have been here," Daniel said quietly. "She is here," Eugene said with simple certainty. "She's always been here." Daniel nodded, folded the photograph with care and held it out. Eugene shook his head. "You keep it." They walked back toward the entrance together. The bouncer was still at the rope, or he had been. By the time Daniel and Eugene reached the entrance, The bouncer was standing 12 feet back. The rope had been unclipped and folded to the side, and the facility director, a man named Gareth Holloway, who had been running events for 21 years and had never once had a military aircraft land in his courtyard, was standing at the door with the expression of a man who had recently revised several of his operating assumptions. "Mr. Calloway," Holloway said, extending his hand to Eugene, "we are deeply sorry for the confusion at the entrance. Please come in. Your seat is at the front." Eugene shook his hand. "Thank you." He said nothing else about it, did not look at the bouncer, did not require an explanation or a spectacle of apology. He simply walked through the door that had been closed to him 14 minutes ago and entered the room that had always been his to enter. Behind him, Daniel paused at the threshold. He looked at the bouncer, not with anger, not with the satisfaction of a man who had won something. Just a long, even look that communicated everything without requiring a single word. The bouncer looked at the floor. Inside, 200 people watched Eugene Calloway walk to the front row and take his seat. Nobody had announced him. Nobody had explained the F-35 on the courtyard, or the flight-suited colonel at the entrance, or the old man in the pressed sage-colored shirt, who now sat with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes forward with the posture of a man entirely at peace with exactly where he was. But the room knew, the way rooms know things when something real has just moved through them. The cadets and young officers seated in the middle rows, men and women who had spent years working toward the privilege of wearing a uniform, rose from their seats without a signal, without discussion, without anyone telling them what the gesture meant or why it was necessary. They simply stood, because some things announced themselves. Daniel took the stage at 7:34 p.m., still in his flight suit, helmet on the podium beside his notes. He spoke for 22 minutes about leadership and sacrifice and the particular kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. The courage of the people who build the foundation that others stand on, who carry dreams forward across generations, who give without requiring credit or witness or acknowledgement. He spoke about a boy from Harlan County who had wanted to fly more than he wanted almost anything, who had served his country in ways that had never been classified but had also never been celebrated, who had worked engine grease into his hands for 40 years and driven a second-hand truck and marked every milestone of his son's career with a small circle on a kitchen calendar. He did not say his father's name. He didn't have to. Eugene sat in the front row and looked at his hands and did not cry, but only barely. At the end, Daniel stepped down from the podium, walked across the front of the room, and sat in the empty chair beside his father. "You wrote that for tonight?" Eugene asked quietly. "I've been writing it my whole life," Daniel said. Eugene was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and produced the invitation envelope, still folded, crease running down the center where he'd folded it in the parking lot. He held it out. "Proof I was on the list," he said. And for the first time all evening, Eugene Calloway laughed. The videos reached 30 million views combined by the end of the week. Not the landing, though that clip circulated everywhere and prompted 3 separate official statements from the Department of Defense regarding airspace protocols and the definition of extraordinary circumstances. The clip that traveled furthest, that was shared in languages Eugene couldn't read and places he'd never been, was 7 seconds long. An old man in a sage-colored shirt, sitting alone on a concrete divider in a parking lot, looking up at the sky, and then the shadow of an F-35 falling over him, enormous and absolute and precise, like an answer arriving exactly on time. The caption that attached itself to the clip, written by the catering worker who had filmed it through the service gate, said simply, "He spent his whole life looking up. His son made sure he had a reason to." Gareth Holloway revised the Meridian's entrance protocols the following week. New staff training, clearer guest verification procedures, a formal written apology delivered to Eugene Calloway at his address in Harlan County. Eugene read it at the kitchen table, set it beside his coffee cup, and went outside to sit on the porch. The porch where he had always watched the sky, the porch where a boy had once stood beside him, small and serious, and already looking upward with an intensity that even then felt like a kind of calling. Eugene sat there until the evening came, and the first stars appeared, and the distant sound of a commercial airliner passed overhead from west to east. He watched it until it disappeared. Then he went inside, found the photograph that Daniel had, after all returned to him before leaving, pressed carefully inside a protective sleeve now, a small challenge coin tucked behind it, and placed it on the mantel beside the kitchen calendar. The challenge coin bore the F-35 program insignia on one side. On the other, 4 words engraved by hand. He looked up first. Eugene went to the calendar, found the small circle he had drawn around the date of the gala, drew a star beside it, the same way he'd marked the really important one since Daniel was 7. Then he put the kettle on, made his tea, and sat down at the kitchen table in the house where his son had grown up believing the sky had no ceiling. Some fathers give their children their dreams because their own roads closed early. They do it without ceremony, without requiring witness, without ever asking to be seen. They simply look up and trust that their children will follow. Subscribe if you believe the greatest sacrifices are the ones that never made the headlines, but made the man.